Hi, I'm Richard Morais, Senior Minister at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center, and I want to thank you for visiting our website and for tuning in to today's message. If you feel inspired by today's talk, I really encourage you to make a donation by hitting that button below and making a contribution to this ministry. It'll allow us to continue these messages online and to do the great work we do here at Unity of Phoenix, which is to inspire people to live better lives. So thanks for tuning in, thanks for your support, and we hope to see you at a Sunday real soon.
Good morning again, everyone. So it's my privilege to be here with you this morning to talk a little bit about the title that I've chosen for this morning's lesson, as soon as I get some of my junk cleared away. So first thing I want to tell you is I had a night out this past Friday evening, my first night out in a long, long time. Most of the time by 6 o'clock, I'm somewhere close to my bed because in any given moment I may fall asleep. So anyway, Mary and I decided to go out to Ak-Chin Pavilion to see Carlos Santana. And some of the folks here were there, huh? It was quite a treat, if I may say. If you love music, he's just incredible. I had seen him perform in Vegas about 4 years ago when he was 65 years of age, and I was impressed by his energy and his stamina and his intellect and his skill with his different guitars and his willingness to speak his truth. And so he's 69 years of age now, so I wanted to see if he still had it. So he got started about 8:15, and he was rocking. We decided to leave about 10 o'clock. He was still rocking. And it was going on when we left that we decided we wanted to get out and beat the crowd out. But early on, he played some of his old standards, and he got some of the young people up on their feet, and they were dancing. First time I'd been to a concert where I couldn't see because somebody's butt was in my face. So it was sort of a new experience for me as a music lover. But after he sort of went through what I call the booty shaking music, then he just about abruptly moved into a soul-stirring rendition of John Coltrane's classic, A Love Supreme. And I mean, that band rocked that tune. And then he, somewhere after about 8 minutes of them playing the tune, he interjected a brief 7 to 10 minute unity sermon in the middle of it on God and on love and on universalism and on nationalism and on patriotism. And then he was even so bold as to interject just a tiny bit of politicism into it. And needless to say, I was and still am inspired. I'm inspired that he's gotten better with age because it gives me hope that I can get better. And I'm inspired because he remains true to himself, and that's a principle that I believe in. I'm inspired because he seems to continue to unfold spiritually. And I'm inspired because even with all of his success, he continues to question and to challenge not only the status quo in terms of life, but the status quo in his own life and in the world. And one of the probing questions that he just sort of slyly instigated into the program was, what is patriotism? And then how does patriotism align with our spiritual quest? Or put another way, how does it fit with our souls? And that's a powerful question. There's an old Celtic saying that I heard a few years ago that still kind of hangs around in my psyche for some reason. And the saying, as I recall it, goes like this. It says, your soul knows the geography of your destiny, and your soul alone has the roadmap of your future. Therefore, you can trust this oblique and indirect side of yourself. For if you do and when you do, it will take you where you need to go. But more importantly, it will teach you a kindness of rhythm in your journey. And I love that idea of a kindness of rhythm in your journey. I love that phrase because life does have a certain kind of rhythm to it. It has a certain flow. And my flow may be different from your flow, but somehow in this kindness of rhythm, we all end up where we need to be when we need to be there. So I want to pull out two important words in that Celtic saying. And one of the words is trust. The other is teach. I'm going to do a little history lesson this morning. In the early formative years of this great nation, there was a lot of distrust, a lot of anger, a lot of divisiveness, a lot of turmoil, a lot of confusion, not unlike there seems to be today. And it pretty much covered every aspect of society because changes were taking place at what seemed like a rapid pace. And many of the great leaders of that era, of that time, they understood at a soul level that change is always going on, so therefore they had to always be willing to adapt and adjust to that change. They didn't take a lot of offense at any of the things that were going on. They just adapted and adjusted to the best of their ability. So since this is the weekend before Independence Day, I want to remind you of a few formative events from the leaders of these United States. And I want you to hear those words, those two words, the United States, when they assembled together to write the Constitution of this great nation. So they assembled, and Benjamin Franklin suggested to them that each session should be opened with prayer. And his reasonings are in these words. Franklin said, and I quote, "I have lived a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proof I see of this great truth, that God governs the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it possible that an empire can rise without his aid?" Thought-probing question. Another event. In the days of the Civil War, a personal friend of Abe Lincoln was visiting the White House at Mr. Lincoln's request. And he told a story that one night just after the Battle of Bull Run, that he was sleeping in his room that was adjacent to Mr. Lincoln's private room, and he had become restless and he could not sleep. And as he continued to toss and turn, he heard from the private room next to him where Mr. Lincoln slept some low tones. And then he noticed that the door was slightly ajar. And so thinking that something was wrong, he got up and he tiptoed to the door, and it was partially open. So he instinctively wandered in, and what he saw was the president on his knees, kneeling before an open Bible, praying this prayer. O God that heard Solomon when he prayed for wisdom, hear me. I cannot guide the affairs of this nation without thy help. President of the United States. One final great moment. The mental image of the nation's first president, George Washington, praying in the snow at Valley Forge in these words: this event is in the hands of God. How will it end? God will direct. My topic for today is soul surgery. It's a term that comes from the mid-1930s. The term was the brainchild of the Reverend Dr. Frank Buckman, who was a liberal Lutheran minister, who was also the instigator and the founder of what is called the Oxford Group. The Oxford Group, like Mr. Buckman, believed that the root of all of our problems in this nation were the result of personal problems of fear and selfishness and feelings of inadequacy of people who are chosen to lead and people who choose to achieve. And that they allowed these personal problems of fear and selfishness and other things to interject into all of life's processes. So Mr. Buckman believed that the solution to these problems was to surrender to what he called God's plan. So this is 1921. So I want to fast forward to today, and I want to tell you about some people and some organizations that you may have been influenced by today that arose out of that belief that Mr. Buckman and his colleagues instigated in 1921. One, the YMCA and the YWCA. Two, the work of Carl Jung and Dr. Paul Tournier, Swiss psychologist. Three, Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, and their drinking buddies, including me. Four, group therapy arose out of this movement, if you will. So did book study groups, or what we call today circle groups. So I don't want to bore you with all this historical stuff, but what I'd like to get across to you this morning for you to consider is that life and all of its processes, success, failure, healing, growth, change, progress, regress, disappointments, achievements, you name it, are not only a part of the individual soul's journey, they are a part of the collective soul's journey as well. And if we don't trust the soul, if we don't trust what the soul is attempting to teach us, then it may be time for us to understand that we can trust a higher power. Seemed to work for Dr. Buckman, seemed to work for Ben Franklin, seemed to work for Abe Lincoln, seemed to work for George Washington, seemed to work for countless others. Let me share a little Old Testament theology from the book of Deuteronomy. It's found in the 30th chapter and the 6th verse. And it reads, "The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your offspring to love the Lord your God with all your heart and being, in order that you may truly live." Circumcising the heart is actually an Old Testament Jewish metaphor for the process of soul surgery. And what it's truly about is delving into the conscious mind with a dedicated intention of rooting out all of the false ideas that an individual has allowed to live there. False ideas about value, about one's talent, about one's worth, about one's connection with God, and then making a conscious decision, if you will, whether they can stand the test of God's truth, which is that you are created in and after the image of God. You're endowed or gifted with his attributes, which is Christ in you, your hope of glory, which is you are greater than your mistakes, you are greater than what you perceive as your sins or your shortcomings, your belief that you're separate from God. You're greater than all of that, which is that you're greater than your pain or your doubt or your fear. Soul surgery. Soul surgery is about cutting deep into the psyche, into the innermost mind, and seeing what you find there and ridding yourself of it if it is not serving you. And then humbly asking God for understanding, for courage, for the will, and all the various aspects of being that we have to call upon to be able to live life happy and hopefully and healthily and successfully. Soul surgery also requires getting rid of some of one's unhealthy habits and using moderation in all of our other habits, because moderation, according to the scripture, is the key to mastery. There's a verse in the 9th chapter of the first book of Corinthians that I've always been fond of, where Jesus uses a race as a metaphor for life. And he says, in essence, that we all run the race of life, but it's the ones who live life fully, the ones who enjoy the journey, the ones who follow their guidance, the ones who trust their soul, the ones who strive for mastery. Those are the ones who receive the prize. And what is the prize? Interesting thing. In the Greek and Aramaic language of Jesus, the prize had a dual meaning. On one hand, it meant an award or a trophy, public award. On the other hand, it meant umpire. So I want you to kind of think about that one. Because it's one thing to get a public award or a trophy for running the race, but it's a whole other thing when you look at it from the perspective of the umpire. Because the umpire gets to participate in the game from every perspective. It doesn't mean that he or she is better, but they get a different perspective of the game. Last thing I'll say about soul surgery is that it has to be both concisive and decisive. Concisive from the standpoint that you've gotten rid of all the stuff that's not your true self, your true being, and decisive from the standpoint that you're ready to stand firm in your own convictions. Helen Keller once said, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of suffering. Freedom is about understanding that that's what our soul's journey is all about. Eric Butterworth wrote in one of his classic books that we need to think of freedom in a more creative sense. The freedom to be big enough to deal with life by releasing our own spiritual capacities. Our idea of freedom takes on an entirely new aspect when we consider it in those terms, as opposed to being free from something or someone. Freedom is a powerful instrument. Each one of us has been gifted with it by virtue of our birth. I know what my concept of freedom is, and I have every belief that you do as well. Stand for it. God bless.